Oh, I remember buying my mom.
Right, so we'll start with making a brief mandala offering as a token for requesting teachings.
Sangye chodan tsoke chonam la chancho bali dami kyabsu chi dagi chi gibe tsamangi drola peche sangye doga sho Sangye chodan tsoke chonam la chancho bali dami kyabsu chi dagi chi gibe tsamangi drola peche sangye doga sho Sangye chodan tsoke chonam la chancho bali dami kyabsu chi dagi chi gibe tsamangi Dola penche sangye dropa sho. Kanki tuzi ni zuni, tawa tanchi pambi che, tangi chungi dungi, kodam kela changse lo. Good evening. Kazi shudayadere sanji chodo Tsultrim chanchi bodam kyabsu chi silawandi yangi korachi gyani chasusira.
So we have been speaking of this verse that we started with. To the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. By the accumulations I gather through either listening to the teachings or through generosity and so forth, may I become Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. So though we have spent a few sessions speaking about this verse, Geshe thought of, it still kind of has a few things to say about it. So we'll still go in circles and look at this verse again and again.
다 잔주 파르도 다음 kyabsu chi silawandi kyabi 문진의 돈 땅의 잔주 선제 탐지기 체도 상기 공부 마토 파르도 아니 캬나마야 kyabsu chigi 이치 chigi 대바 chigi 로 딘디지 차도 왔어.
As it starts with to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly, and recognizing the objects of refuge, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. So we recognize what we seek the state of enlightenment, and for that end, we go for refuge to you, the objects of refuge. I go for refuge to you. I have faith, I have trust in these objects of refuge.
이래서다 pena shesa mashivana ani chomden keran kalaya yasha yatama nyingi is ro yasha yatama keran ya kyapchu keran kang sombati ani ni chigi is ta tembyen dilya tamcha da masuna ani chibi chedi ani tembala kyapsu de kyamju set namda do de diredos ta ma 바바이나 그러가지고 대치 되게 주지도 돈을 마시고 막 바바이나 그냥 나 사마기 봐도 그냥 강성도 되게 지긴 있어 덤빈들이야 담자 제바디 덤벌 겹수리 겹는 남다디 자기였어
So that when we think of this scenario where in the presence of the Buddha, for example, when we go for refuge, we say, I trust what you told me 100%. I have complete trust, 100% trust and believe in what you said. And I trust that from this time on and until my own enlightenment, I shall do what you said. So this is the meaning of going for refuge, right? Developing that trust in the Buddha and what the Buddha said and being committed, promising to do just that.
어디래서 디다 딱히 송바 난신지 걔 강송바 디 아니 라는 타이밍스 라운디 아 쳬르 캡수드 캡르티 디차도 왔어 템베 가르송 거래서 뒤던 넘버 건데 좀 된들이야 송야 디 찍마도 요마스 쳬드레스 타와드 탐지 게임 공부투비 쳬드 아니 쳬 와식 송진 그러 난전 난신이 아니지 뒤서 trouble 직디 자원인다 비주 지금도 왔어.
So we think about it. I will put into practice just that, the thing that you have taught, that you have said, and what the Buddha taught was just the Dhamma, nothing else but the Dhamma. So when we think of the meaning of this verse in this way, it's not just empty words or wasteful speech, so to speak, that we begin with at the beginning of this session or whatever we do. It has a great significance.
들이다 강송보다 라는 따라야래야 아니 라는도 따라와래야 더 랑기 란도기 비기래야 라는 따 투메와 인자 더 라마기 위신이 지래 땡치네 년섬 공송 수진도 제바디 겐도 건조라야 le tebato gendo kunjolaya kyapsuwandi dile lagaji ta gendo kunjolaya kyapsu dosuji yasamares ro.
And as we make this commitment to practice in a way that accords with the instructions of the Buddha, we also recognize that it's not that we'd be able to do that just on our own accord by ourselves. We need to be taught how to do it by spiritual teachers, and this is where we develop a sense of reliance upon the Sangha, the objects of refuge, the Sangha. So in going for refuge to the Sangha, we then develop this mental reliance, thinking that I'm going to rely upon you so that I will know how to practice what the Buddha taught.
피기래야 가서 다지 아니 템바 산지가 킬렌데와 템비 쳐도 싸치무이 킬렌데와 안디 냠슬링이 겐도콘조 싸치무이 야고레 삼바 짬기 엔 cam도 남다 차게메디 대점을 해도스 cam도 남다 차게메디 템비 송바 난신기 라네도 딱진 진 정인디려야 안다 cam도 남다 진짜 cam도 남다 지겨 버리나 아니 just some tamji druguri saidi tangoni thandre dosra.
And with that in mind, we can then think of the meaning of a true or genuine refuge, a pure refuge. To have a genuine, pure refuge in a mind stream would not be just trusting the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha in a sense that it wouldn't be just kind of saying that I completely accept the Buddha as refuge, the Dhamma as refuge, or the Sangha as refuge. That alone would not be enough in order to have pure refuge. To have pure and perfect refuge, we also need the practical side, to put it into practice. If we then, through trust in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and developing a sense of reliance, we also take it up in our practice. Through that, we develop pure refuge. That would be the mark.
And di shinjuchi and di nyamnechi and di korasam drobaina sangialaya one gale teso yungu samaris ra tanganzu tuzu been chuzu chignang chuzu chigla bagoina kama sums drawch mado nyamne kor chigyo maras ti machi di dinji chigi chek mado manzule chungri theme badi seu shuchi rangandole seu shuchagdus.
So this is then how we take it up into our practice, refuge in the three jewels. So if we then only think about it in that way without putting it into practice, it's not going to cut it. But then if you think about it and you then also look at how you take it up into your practice, you come to see that actually in the great scheme of things, it's not that hard to apply it into your practice. And yet, how much do we still do it? When we look at the passage of time, like for example, when we try to assess how much time do we spend in putting it into practice, just looking at, for example, in fasting of 1 hour, do we spend even 3 minutes on this matter? Not even that. And if we don't spend enough time, we don't give it enough time to put it into practice, then needless to say that a massive result will not arise from our practice.
Vegetagores, Tadava vegetarian, vegetarian, Tadina this tagores me. That one the Zambala, Ningarangaraya, Pig, Zawa dan Jawani di, Zawa imbatan, Jawa imbachik, and it moshi chigu dos, Ningarangara dilidochi, and designing dilichodus, Mang Chiaji, and then Jawajan lay a teaching, Droshawaina, Zawa Karimbadi. Love rich, so one of the Benagal Kiwi, Nalanda Kevosuri, Pug Kevos, Samologi, Song Deadi, Tempe Songim, Javari Mato, did Zaw Chago Maris. In the time, Manzun Javala ten Goba Karesna, Zavi Kitanda, Zavi, and Georgia Kaim, but di and Toyak Chedu, Manzun Javatagoris, Pendenjumondo Genoloya. Dödün dela tutto biçerdu jizun chamon gombe tenjung ondo sambares ando tenjung ondo jin joja di jizun chamon gombe tembi maso jik sadu soja jik zawin chago mares.
So then for that end, we need to listen to the teachings of the Buddha, the teacher. We need to meet those teachings in a sense that we need to come across those teachings, we need to listen to those teachings, we need to study those teachings. And Geshe said that he has been doing it so far. He has done some studies before and he still does. He still reads text. To whatever extent we do that, we still need to do that. And in still going through some text, still studying, we also need to be able to identify root texts and the commentaries. Because we do read different texts, we read through root texts and their commentaries. Often we don't really make that distinction between a root text and a commentary. And even most of the time we look at commentaries, we study commentaries without really looking at the source for those teachings, tracing them back to the roots. Like, for example, we studied the teachings of the great Nalanda masters. We studied the teachings of Tibetan masters. But these are all commentaries. The root for them are the teachings of the Buddha. So, for example, when you look at a root text, the root text of all those different commentaries, those commentaries elucidate, they explain clearly what is the subject matter or the import of the root text. So just to give you an example, Maitreya composed the ornament for clear realization in order to make it possible to easily find the Buddha's intent. And as such, it is a commentary. It is a commentary that has a particular purpose. It's not that Maitreya's text is a root text that is found outside of the Buddhist system, that is teaching something else than the Buddhist system. Rather than that, it's a treatise. It is a commentary that is aiming at gaining an easy access to the Buddhist teaching.
Semda nyewu chaya di ani laya gi nyenga tochi dewa tsombo bu pegi ani lama susone di khora ma da pegi ani tembe gi song yin ba chi ani so chong joy na ani nganzu chomden de ya semda rin ro ya nyenga dos kezi di le bai na nganzu cham ro ton ya gi nyenga yoris jasha ja tam ro kyayu ta do di chomden de yin ba di doju kun gi ta ani gondun zo chagoras.
If we only study commentaries, if we read only commentaries, in that sense, we are losing contact with the teachings of the teacher, the Buddha. And as such, we're creating a gap between ourselves and the teachings of the Buddha. In that sense, kind of we'll draw further and further away from the teachings of the Buddha if we only going to look at commentaries. We're going to have a lesser degree of appreciation or consideration for those teachings of the Buddha. There will only be this distance that will be created between ourselves and the teachings of the Buddha. So with that in mind, then we ought to make sure that we don't only look at commentaries, but we also pay attention to the root texts.
Tesum kang cheba di kyamru namda chaya gi chagyen ya tuntu ko dos ra kyamru namda chaslang di so di ani tembi dawo tembo chomden de ya ani chi shindu ni senda ni wo chaya chi tembi gi song di tanda di chimma chije gi tok tu ya gi ani tawla ya ro tu ge chi ani tembi khang song ba di sen ding pe ani kechim bu dang ani tsa chim ji ba sor tu ya gi tabla ya dro ina ani kyam ju nam da ki da chok cha dos.
So we practice those teachings, we study them, we reflect upon them. And we do that so that our refuge will become pure, will become genuine. Our study, our reflection and practice, all of these are conditions that are conducive for developing pure refuge. And in doing so, we draw closer and closer in our heart to the Buddha, the Bhagavan. Not only that, through that we develop a better understanding of the teachings of the Buddha, the Bhagavan. We develop a greater sense of appreciation to the teachings. We see them as being very important, and that supports a genuine refuge.
다 다기 진소 기비 손을 기 졸라베지 상기 주고 쇼세디 아니 진소 기비 솔라보치 사다 마사디 아니 곤드셰비기 깜드 남달이야 아니 라리기어레스 솔라보치 차마자디.
So we say, first of all, with the first two lines, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. Then in the last two lines, generally we say, by the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha for the sake of all. So then we begin with going for refuge. And when a mind is attuned to going for refuge, the accumulation of the collections becomes vast and extensive, or it becomes powerful, right? So you can say that what drives a powerful accumulation, first off, is going for refuge.
다 진소 기비 손음 기세기 아니 짐발로 소바다 발신 truti truti 송고레스 다 지단 발신 tru다 짐발 수도서 손을 상대 셔르세디 디 차고로스로
지금 그런 게디 속 라보체서 디 겸도된데 소인바 지금 천주기 쌤 그런 천주기 쌤 돌아서는 단계야 야만아
전주선 또 차고로 다 진소 기비 속디 심자 탐지 상기 투비 귤로다 만도디 아니 겸도라 투고레스.
Okay. So the last two lines say, by the accumulations I gathered through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha for the sake of all. But the accumulations are gathered through generosity. Generosity is the first of the six perfections. So the accumulations that we gather through generosity, ethics, patience, choice effort, absorption, and wisdom, all of these constitute the creation of the causes that contribute to our attainment of the state of enlightenment.
가스는 배는 지당 짐바세디 아니 nansu pensum kunulani 다지 조 신라 야 제바 디나니 다지 아니 냠타 오모 팀들이야 아니 가르제바이네 디 자위기 짐바차고레스 로 짐바차고레스.
So, for instance, generosity, with the thought of being of benefit to others, we give. We give to those that are disadvantaged, to those that are impoverished. That becomes generosity.
레다 딘디 짐바디 베는 다 상기비 추차야라야 아니 추차야라야 추 비기 타와다 탐지키비 규드로가 제발이야 아니 So
first off, for a practice to become a Dhamma practice that will lead us to the state of liberation, even more so to the state of Buddha, to the state of omniscience, to begin with, it needs to depend upon refuge, pure, correct refuge.
제도 상기 투비 규르웨라야 아니 겸루다 전주고 셈니기 싱고에지 차고로스.
And then to act as a cause for the attainment of the state of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient being, whatever we do, such as practicing generosity, whatever we do needs to be combined with both refuge and the mind of enlightenment. It needs to be qualified by these two, refuge and bodhicitta.
Tsultrim ki nyamnim di lethar rogores. Tsultrim ki nyamnim ki shide rogdi and jimbi nyamnim ya tugores ta sanjik somero.
So we practice generosity with the intention to give that is qualified by refuge. can be qualified by renunciation, can be qualified by bodhicitta, but at the very basis, it is qualified by our going for refuge. And with that, we develop the good intention to give. And when you develop the intention to give, generosity, it acts as it acts in a way that is making ethical discipline, the next practice in line, it makes it easier. In that, when you look at how the Buddha taught the perfections, generosity, and so forth, the Buddha says that first of generosity, the practice of generosity acts as a foundation for the practice of ethics. And the reason for that is when you look at what prevents us from practicing generosity, what is acting as an adverse condition for generosity. The things that prevent us from being generous are miserliness or attachment, which not only prevent us from giving things to others, but they also prevent us from making good use of the things that we have. Attachment is such a filthy state of mind in the sense that you might have something that belongs to you and you don't have any usage for that. You don't use it. And yet because of attachment, because of miserliness, you're incapable of giving it away to others. And therefore, we need to train from young age with that intention to give things away. Otherwise, if we don't train from young age, the older we get, the harder it becomes, or we get worse and worse in terms of this miserliness or attachment. Geshe has had ample advice that were given by teachers in the monastery. Like one of them was saying that you really need to be careful that you don't develop this miserly attitude. And that if you don't train yourself from young age with developing the intention to give, and you start with hoarding stuff, so keeping more and more things that you don't really need, that you don't have any usage to them, you get to the point in which you refuse even to give away small things such as sticks, right? So you might have a stick, just a small stick in your possession, and you have no use for it, and yet you can't give it away. So you really need to be careful. You really need to take care that that does not happen. So with that in mind, think of what you have in your house or in your room. How many of those things you don't use normally? Often we find that most of the things that we store in our houses or rooms, we don't use normally. And we cannot give them away to places or to those that have some use of them, that need them. We don't give them away in thinking that, well, I don't use it now. I might need it later. So many things we store in our houses like that, don't we?
That dushu jilayati karsavata chala mamu nyayadi ani jela chik ta mira chik lena ta ani ngotsawa da yabu chakman samsam ro chik pena da pena thale thuma ro kap ro tindi yimbaina mamu shuji nyasho ro das ro ta ngoni gi chawadam tsuma yabu jimaina susule chikran ji nyach peju chia ani miledi mebaina ya di ngoni china ngotsa goya ji rema das chawata yang chin detuya di ngoni china susu mitsig sigjeri deine nganzu di kyun pena ngaro kyun cheto mo di.
Think about it in terms of crockery, for example. How many plates and cups and so forth do we store in our houses? Thinking that if I have guests in the future, I need to have a nice set of crockery. But then when you think about it, particularly when you're a monastic, then you only need one set of, one plate and cup and so forth. So even if you have a visitor, it doesn't really matter if you don't have anything nice to offer to that visitor. Actually, could be a sign of actually living a simple life. It's not a bad thing.
어디 단딘자다 두사마로 당한지 짐비기 냠네 아니 돈스 간지 아니 차섬 슈치비 온기 용되기요 세우차게도 딘자다 간지 짐비 냠닌디 인지민지기 아니 좀된들이야 다 이진남다 좀된디 강송바디 제희 인생이 미징문이 이 짐비 냠닌디 네버도 락터 치고도 왔으라.
And therefore, the main hindrance that prevents us from practicing that mind that gives the intention to give is that mind of attachment. So if you develop full trust in the Buddha, the Bhagavan, and you think to yourself, I really need to put that into practice, this is where you begin. You think that I will be committed to, for example, practice giving.
Terdiza ta jimbi nyamning gotsu sadi ta lojong nangolaya gotsu sadi ani rang ning chon gotsu gores gotsu tene parmin cholandro tene dai chola kanji ani jiso jimba ta ani soba la soba an samalo ani penata ninji ani chamba gomba la soba do samalo pigi drodan chikpa rochiki.
And yet, when you take up those practices, you do it gradually. First off, it is said that you practice things like giving with those that are close to you, friends and the like. Then you practice with those in between, strangers. And finally, you also practice it with enemies, those that you dislike. And the same thing also applies to the cultivation of love, loving kindness and compassion.
Do se ani jimbatang do xiong digi ani tonsum shukchen rondi penada chakshin ra chala chilaya chakshin de ilaya chen tu chakshin torondi ani chakshin chong ra ani tonsum shukchen royaji ko komdi tembaina yong choya jire dos ta chakshin kadzu shukchong di tsogi ani surum songya ya ta memugo baros ra.
You take up the practice of generosity and you increasingly develop your ability to give, and commensurate with that, your mind of attachment reduces or it diminishes. The greater your habituation is with the intention to give, the less attached you are to the things that you have. And if the mind of attachment is reduced. If it abates, you have a good basis for guarding ethics. You have a greater ability to guard your ethics.
That's that Jimbi in Tolia, Mango Dine Kanji, and Jimbi Yang so deep, Jimbi Yang so deep, and Chashin Toya Dres, Chashi, and Chavashu Chong Toya, Chetu, Jimbi Yang Chigos. That depends on the solo, the team devil Lonjola solo, Johnson Mambu Son and so deep, Chashin Toyati, Lea Congo, those ra.
And the main purpose of generosity is to overcome attachment, to reduce our attachment, to overcome it. Of course, it is said that by practicing generosity, you will have resources and so forth. Although the outcome of generosity is resources, is said to be resources, still, the main purpose in practicing generosity is to reduce our attachment.
Tilda Chashin Torgoyadi Tanjishionajita on Sudrum Ginyamni and Tarshimbaji Yoyakchet. That Sudrum Ginyamni di Nonzula Karchin Gogores Laundi, Karchin Gogores Laundi, Nansu, and Kevin Conjosulia, Kapsudrungi, Kanzaki, and Drivja Tartubadi, Tawa the Tamjin Kim Combinza, Tawa the Tamjin Kim Combodavaya, never do any Sudrum Yams language or Dichagores.
So then we overcome attachment, and through that we then complete our guarding of ethical discipline. And we need ethical discipline for a person that is aiming at either attaining the state of liberation or wanting to attain the state of omniscience, the state of Buddha. If you aspire for either one of those states, liberation or omniscience, ethics is indispensable for you.
Benada, Deodel Dungam Mundeva Jimba, Sudrum Songoyachik. Ra, Sudrum Mason in Yemi di, and Dunga Yungu mother, Deva Yungu Mares. Benada, Jinga the Rajo Kumo, just Yami Tony, and Yamsuna, Sudrum Megichubung, Sudrum Tavadi, Megichubung, Sudrumgi, maintain Chola Shubaina, and Rangi Tsetonia, and Lonjo Yondroya, and Yawachimangandu Kigo the Soba. But this is some low, and Sudrum Mentushok Togi, Yunguyores.
And we need ethical discipline to begin with, because we've recognized that all of us want to be happy and none of us wants to suffer. If we seek happiness and we want to avoid suffering, ethics is indispensable for that. Just to illustrate that, whether you're a monastic or whether you're a lay person, ethical discipline that abstains from the 10 non-virtuous action is the basic ethical discipline, the very foundation of ethical discipline that we adopt. And if we incur one of the things that is incompatible with ethics that abstains from the 10 non-virtues, the undesired result that we get from that is suffering. And there are different forms of suffering that will occur, either experiencing shorter life, having less resources, being born in a miserable state of existence, and so forth.
Tilda, the Taru Combo Tovan Dingy Jimbaina, Ranchik Wichid, Taru Combo Tovan Dingy Jimbaina, Sudrum Mason Tami, Sudrum Shizakora Chagoras, Ra.
If you want to attain the state of liberation, even if it's for your own sake alone, ethics is indispensable. It is the foundation for that as well.
The Dini, Nanzutachi, Tebachimbichu, and someone Tebachimbichu, Yamni, Chigin singing model, Tebambichu, Yamni, the Chigman, remember the Rosi Dondo, shedding it to Tebachimbichu, Zawadi, and Selmivale Chagores. Selmi Chamzig Yamni. Chamzig Yamni Zodi. Chamze said, Jania tell Majeva, some must Shania, and Changyong chip together, and Nyanangela Brody, and Sudrum di Shenu Shitacheva, Domba di Sudrum Rimado, till lost Sudrum Saji Yomaras.
And even more so, we regard ourselves as practitioners of the Mahayana. All of us see ourselves as practitioners of the Mahayana. And sometimes we go to the extent in which we emphasize that I am a practitioner of the Mahayana, making it appear as if to be a practitioner of the Hinayana is not good, as if we look down on them. This is not kind of a good attitude to have at all. And yet we sometimes have that attitude. And the root, if we think of what the root is of Mahayana practice, the root of Mahayana practice is non-harmfulness. That is engendered with a sense of genuine loving concern for others. And if we have the genuine loving concern for others, we need to abstain from harming them. Not only just abstain from harming them, we need also to care for others, to nourish others with a sense of genuine concern, loving concern. For that, we need ethical discipline. Ethical discipline that abstains from harming others and the basis of that harm.
There's a degree shit nanga chimbu, and Tsultrim Nyamsulea, then Gorgia the Moslem, Kalakashi the Ganicha was in the and on the Kyotomam on the Comdegi, and Chasam Delia, two diganza, then on the Ganji and Chasam di Nyon Tango was.
Therefore, this base of practice, ethical discipline, is important to us. But what makes it so hard to practice ethical discipline? What makes it so hard is attachment. Attachment that has been there since time without beginning and up until now.
Tilda Dinza, the Chasam and Nyon Tangalia, to Yundingi, and it's Pigilia, Chasam Chishu di Pena Kala Soroj was Kala the Dulo Soba and Nekama Soba, that Dinichi, that Dinimamu Yunguras, but Dinjilia and this Nyon Tang to a chick, and Drogo does Tango Tango Dinitsugo was a restaurant.
And since attachment is the thing that has been there since time without beginning, and it makes it harder for us then to gather ethical discipline, we start with reducing a sense of attachment. And when we address a sense of attachment, we first of look at the things that we are attached to on an ongoing or regular basis. Like, for example, we look at different areas in our life. We might be attached to food, to clothing, to our houses, residence, appliances in our houses. So this is where we start. We start with reducing a sense of attachment to those things.
Sojung Tombala Soba, Gening Tombala Soba, Tendisio Galia, and Chidro Casituzo Katuana, Tende and Chasam Lea, and Chasam Nyon Droya, Pentoyova Chick, Son Yores.
And to support our practice, the Buddha, the Bhagavan, the one that gave instructions with skillful means, have created systems, such as, for example, for monastics, that make it easier to reduce that sense of attachment. For monastics, for example, one of the rules is to avoid eating after lunch or afternoon. But it's not only for monastics, also lay practitioners can take it up in their practice if you can practice it in the framework of approaching virtue, or when you practice precepts, right? You can also take up this practice of avoiding having food afternoon. This is one of the things that we use in order to reduce our attachment.
주 야리야스 세바이나 아니 수비기 떡기 수비는 감기 온디 라 감기 온디 아니 차바 배야지
Together with the strength of your body, you also get a sense of attachment that creeps in. This is what you find. This is a statement or reference that you find in the Vinaya tradition that says that when your body goes from strength to strength, when the elements in your body are flourishing, when they're increasing, also your sense of attachment goes along with that. It also grows and increases.
어디다 어딘지게 딱 간지 배는 수수 간투주두기 상우스단 제와이나 아니 간점절에다 공지태야지로 수정기념을 주투야지 공기교 담을수가 용구여디 만sol아야다 용구로 왔어.
Sorry, I kind of neglected to say that Geshe said that if we have that idea of having food like the best of the best, or a lot of quantity, so that our body becomes stronger, bigger and stronger, that comes with a sense of attachment. So then we reduce a sense of attachment, and in order to reduce a sense of attachment, we need to create habits. This is how the great masters of the past have practiced. They have also created certain habits that contributed to reduction in attachment.
다들 딘디게 다 소봉 수종기 냥니 타심버지 용내야 깔리냐고 그랬어. 로 배준치고 그랬어. 딘자 좀주된 거랬어야지. 로 아니 수종기 질래야. 좀주기 냥니 소야디 디레도스. 나지 깨어 터마면이야. 검대 로디 아니 렐하우지기 규주단이 가고 싶어지러스. 그래서 디 규주단이 쳐도 아니 멘토는 배준치고야지. 그 우연에서 차고랬어. 그래서 좀주된 거야디 디니송 거랬어. 다 키치슈.
So we have ethics, and not only ethics, but also patience. And for this too, we need to put a lot of effort into our practice. We need to work hard on ethics and patience. And in order to be able to work hard, we need joyous effort. We need joyous effort because we are working with certain states of mind that exist in some without beginning and up until now, and they will not be easily shifted. That shift will not be easily brought about. For that, we need constant effort.
terda jidang zungdu di jimba tsudum nyamsu lembalaya and zungdu tengodus and samden sherab nyamsu lembalaya and zungdu tengodus ra.
For generosity and ethics, we need joyous effort. For absorption and wisdom, we need joyous effort.
That dini that carrying gorsedi nanzu jimbi nyamnen da sudung nyamnen kyambajig thone and nanzu tawan debanamji taw top tugurebe and tamsi kemal debanamji tamsi gibi ko top tugurebes lavaina tug mares tetsam tug mares odela kar goresandi ti nyamdu sherab gores ra sherab.
You might wonder, is it enough for me to practice generosity and ethics to attain the state of liberation? Or is the state of omniscience afforded only through generosity and ethics? Would that be enough? The answer is that these two are not enough for attaining the state of liberation or the state of omniscience. In order to attain these two states, liberation or omniscience, you need wisdom.
Reda sherab diyan bigige that dame batobe sherab goya zo diyan and chadang zao marig bigin zindan di and bigige da ran to zimba maribati di zindan and da 다디 아니 말이 있다고 써마도 병무변는 소리야 다라운드 메바디 무연내주 딘통위기 아니 로데리아 셔럽슬라지 and 디고그레스
Wisdom is needed in order to attain those states. So when we say that wisdom is needed, of the different types of wisdom that can be developed, the one that we need is the wisdom of selflessness, wisdom that realizes selflessness, which will work against ignorance of grasping at the self, as if the self exists independently. And independent self is something that is only imputed by ignorance. In reality, there is no independent self. And this is what wisdom realizes, the lack of an independent self.
들다 딘지기 셔럽디 아니 여바짱기 당진디 세븐디 집은 고투기요 말스 진짜 셔럽디 아니 셔럽디 세부 템부 가서다 야부 쇼즈고 원자 디 아니 삼덴을 땡기 원자 아니 존주기 지수 삼덴 체야디 조 셔럽기 된데 삼덴 손요레스라
Just to have the wisdom of selflessness is not going to cut it in terms of overcoming ignorance of grasping at the self. Mere wisdom is not going to be enough. We need to have clear wisdom. We need to have stable wisdom. And in order to develop those facets of wisdom, we need to practice absorption or dhyana. The practice of absorption, the fifth perfection, the perfection of absorption, is practice in order to develop stability and clarity so that they will support wisdom in this way.
You'll say we should talk to you. Share of Yonga, Sam Demuji Mevaina, and it be any Chadangi, Chos, any Gunjemi, you're thinking Jiki, Samgi, and it Dami returned to see we talk to Menza, and deal be Nami the Gobala Sova, and some cartooningi, something loti, and things to Jumni, and share of the Trochikoech, Chagonza, something to Sungus.
We sometimes mention the aspects of wisdom that needs to be developed. We need to have great wisdom, clear wisdom, swift wisdom. And without developing these characteristics, these aspects of wisdom, we're not going to be able to remove ignorance of grasping at the self. We need to develop not only wisdom, but wisdom that is totally clear about its object with utmost clarity. Without developing wisdom that is unshakable, that is unmoving, unflinching, we're not going to be able to completely remove ignorance of grasping at the self. In order to develop that type of wisdom that is great, that is swift, that is clear, that is unshakable, that is unmoving, and so forth, we need to rid ourselves of distraction, of excitation, and so forth. We need to rid ourselves of mental wandering, and this is what we rid ourselves of when we develop absorption. Right? So the practice of absorption is necessary in order to develop that clarity, speediness, greatness of wisdom.
Something said, things said, and same the you can't you tagaraya, and Zichig net which the thing is the bigger. Sent home would be and you Katsuski mean Dego Chonaya, and it Betsu never dare to the Kalaya, and it thing in Zita and Setoshudi. legores. That the legores.
And when we practice absorption, we develop concentration. And we develop the concentration, our concentration to the point in which whatever object we observe it with a sense of stability, single-pointedness of mind, to the point in which if we develop high level of concentration, the highest level, our concentration becomes at will, in that it can stay single-pointed on an object for as long as we want to, without wandering off.
that thing that man's let tambo kalaya and gom yang in chimba no chik up toning samlaya mahimba pigi yul chilaya saltani and suzu kazus de tu yeme tolaya tarjichi de matu kalaya di and yan yang de tilaya and jondar chevaina and things in yanglaya drugdos ra and D is same jonderchi on consume jilaya same you control she ya teba ina ya chala shawa na shinchin de to yaji yungu yosares.
And when you take up this practice, don't just remain focused on your breath, but also take up other objects, visualize them, and assess how long can you hold a concentrated mind just focused on an object without wandering off. And when the mind does wander off, then you bring it repeatedly back to the object. You place it again and again on the object so that over time you're able to extend the amount of time that you can stay with that object. And through that, you develop concentration. And when you do it repeatedly, you increase your ability to remain placed upon that object. This is how you practice concentration.
Terdanganzu semlaya on gyunginji mebaino and nyumumbi on kitchen chadang on kitchen and that din dimage chadru yanza one gyunging gabutawdi and something there is and songodasra.
Without taking control over the mind will still be under the sway of our afflictive states of mind, anger, attachment, and so forth. And therefore, this practice of absorption through which we develop our concentration is said to be that which wields power over the mind like a king. Shall we leave it here for now?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's say some dedication prayers. Chanchu Sancho Rinpoche, Maji Pano Keguchi, Kevanya Rame Baya, Gone Gondo Pewa Sho, Gewadinyo Duda, Amasange Joachi Kamano, De Sala Gopa Sho, Kandri Rawe, Koe Shingante, Pendande Wa Malu Jowen, Shenresi Wonten Zingetsu, Shape Site Pantu Tengyu Chi. Anchin Jangun Jangwe Ten, Zengyong Pewe Konzo Drupot, Choson Kowe Lemon Drupa, Tazo Duje Kandu Shabdin Sho. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chikila.
Talk to you soon, eh?